They say a person's true worth isn't measured by what they own, but by what they fight to protect. Some battles aren't about money or power, but about dignity, family, and the soil beneath our feet. This is the story of a 73-year-old farmer, a man who walked into an auction with nothing but his life savings and a heart full of hope, only to be laughed at, humiliated, and pushed aside. What happened next, however, would silence the room, ignite a community, and remind us all that sometimes justice arrives when least expected. Stay with me, and if you believe dignity and fairness should never be forgotten, don't forget to follow, like, and share your thoughts below. Raymond Miller was 73 years old, his back bent slightly from decades of labor, his hands marked with the calluses of endless work. For him, the land in Lacey County was not just dirt and crops. It was memory, bloodline, and the soul of his family. His grandfather had endured the Dust Bowl without selling a single acre. His father had modernized just enough to survive the mid-century agricultural changes, and Ray himself had kept the farm running. Never rich, never poor, just steady. That farm, established in 1927, was the core of who he was. Yet fate has a way of testing dignity. After his wife passed away, unnoticed clerical mistakes and unpaid back taxes piled silently in government files, until one morning, a cold envelope announced that his farm would be auctioned. He had 45 days to erase what officials called delinquency. To them, it was paperwork. To Ray, it was the erasure of generations. He sat across the desk from a young county clerk, her eyes filled with sympathy as she said the words that broke him quietly. The only way to stop the auction is to pay in full. $14,372.18. It was almost everything he had saved over a lifetime of work, tucked away in quiet discipline, penny by penny, year after year. He didn't hesitate. If this was the price to keep his family's story alive, he would pay it gladly. He withdrew the money, every bill counted twice, then tucked them neatly into a worn postal envelope that he slipped inside his jacket. For days, he rehearsed the moment he would stand tall before the auctioneer, not as a beggar, but as a man reclaiming what was rightfully his. On the morning of the auction, Ray rose before dawn. The ritual felt sacred. He shaved more carefully than usual, combed his thinning white hair, and buttoned his best blue shirt, the one he usually reserved for Sundays at church. He stood before the mirror, adjusting his posture, reminding himself that appearances mattered. With a deep breath, he patted the envelope, resting in his inside pocket, feeling the fragile weight of his life's work. The drive to the county seat took 40 minutes in his faded 1992 Ford pickup, its paint washed pale by years of sun and rain. As he parked in the public lot, luxury cars and sleek black SUVs pulled in beside him, their drivers brisk and polished in tailored suits. A few curious glances fell on his old truck, on the stooped man climbing out with steady, deliberate steps. But Ray held his head high. Inside the grand meeting hall, conversations filled the air like buzzing bees. Investors, developers, and speculators traded whispers about land parcels, profits, and housing projects. Ray sat quietly in the back row, filling out his registration form with slow, careful handwriting. Every line was written with the weight of his future. When he approached the desk, the clerk's eyes shifted. She whispered to a colleague who nodded toward the head auctioneer, a man with a gold watch that caught the light. The auctioneer scanned Ray's form, frowning. "Mr. Miller, is it? I see you've indicated cash payment." "Yes," Ray replied calmly, reaching for his envelope. "I'm afraid that's not acceptable for transactions of this nature," the man sneered. "We require a bank guarantee or certified check, not cash in an envelope. This isn't a farmer's market." A ripple of chuckles spread through the crowd. Ray tried to speak, his voice steady but firm. There was nothing in the notice about "It's standard procedure," the auctioneer cut him off sharply. He turned to the guards at the side of the room. "Security, please escort him out. Perhaps he can inquire about proper procedures next time." The two men appeared instantly, one at each elbow, guiding Ray toward the exit. He did not struggle. He did not beg. He pulled his cap lower to shadow his eyes. The envelope of cash still clutched firmly in his hand. Behind him, laughter followed like cruel footsteps. Someone whispered loudly enough to be heard, "Did he really think he could buy back his farm with mattress money?" Ray walked out with his dignity intact, but inside his chest, the ache was heavy. What no one noticed was the young reporter in the corner, her camera quietly recording every moment, capturing the insult, the arrogance, and the quiet endurance of a man too proud to argue but too human to forget. Ray sat on the tailgate of his old Ford pickup, the hot sun pressing down on his shoulders. But he hardly felt its weight. The envelope of bills still rested in his hand. Every dollar he had ever saved, now useless in the face of procedures and pride. He stared at the courthouse steps, the laughter from inside still echoing in his ears. From his back pocket, he pulled out a folded letter, creased from being read too many times. It was the one he had written 2 weeks earlier to the governor. The words on the page had been simple. Not a plea for charity, not a cry for special treatment, but a request for fairness. I only ask for a chance to keep what my father left me, he had written. Land that has fed this county for nearly a century. No reply had come, and Ray had not expected one. In his 73 years, he had learned that men like him were often invisible in the eyes of power. He folded the letter again, tucking it away, the envelope of cash heavy against his chest like a useless heart. Inside the hall, the auctioneer's chant rolled through the open windows. Fast, mechanical, relentless. Within minutes, the Miller farm was sold, just like that. A passerby emerged from the building, shook his head when he saw Ray. They just sold your place, the man said softly, his voice edged with regret. Some investment group from Dallas. Didn't even ask about the soil. Didn't care about the house. They'll probably build something on it. Ray nodded once, swallowing the bitterness like a stone. Thank you, he murmured. The man lingered, as if searching for more words, but fell silent. Both knew the truth. Business rarely made space for what was right. Ray climbed into the truck, his fingers trembling as he fit the key into the ignition. The sound of sirens split the air before he could turn it. He looked up, puzzled, as 5 black SUVs came rolling into the lot, followed by 2 police motorcycles. Flags mounted on the hood of the lead vehicle fluttered in the late morning sun, the state insignia unmistakable. Doors flung open, security personnel poured out, scanning the area with sharp eyes. Cameras flashed as reporters, drawn as if by instinct, hurried forward. From the center SUV stepped a woman every person in the county knew by sight, Governor Karen Langford. At 58, she carried herself with practiced composure, her stride purposeful, her gaze unwavering as she ignored shouted questions from the press. She moved straight into the building without pause, trailed by aides and guards. Ray sat frozen, the engine still quiet, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The governor at a routine county auction? Impossible. And yet there she was, disappearing into the very hall from which he had been thrown minutes before. Inside, the investors who had just claimed the Miller farm were already whispering among themselves, talking of housing projects, commercial development, profit margins. Their voices stilled when the double doors at the back of the hall burst open. Governor Langford walked in like a storm. Her eyes swept the room, sharp as flint. She strode to the front where the auctioneer stood, his confidence draining in her presence. Her voice cut through the silence, needing no microphone. This proceeding is temporarily suspended. Murmurs filled the room, shock on every face. Where is Raymond Miller? She demanded. The auctioneer stammered, pointing weakly toward the exit. He was asked to leave. Find him, the governor ordered, turning to her aide. The command carried no hesitation, no room for argument. Minutes later, Ray stood by his truck, bewildered, as the governor approached. She extended her hand, her expression steady, almost warm. Mr. Miller, she said, I received your letter last night. Ray removed his cap, his voice faltering. I never thought you'd read it, ma'am. I read every letter that crosses my desk, she replied evenly, though the weight in her tone suggested this one mattered more than most. She glanced at her staff. We're placing an immediate hold on the Miller property transaction under State Regulation 42B. The auction terms violated transparency law. Her aide nodded, already typing furiously on a tablet. Ray blinked, struggling to process her words. I don't understand. Governor Langford's gaze softened. Mr. Miller, you're not alone in this. There have been irregularities in how farms like yours are being handled. Your letter came at exactly the right moment. For the first time that day, the old farmer felt something stir inside him. Not victory, not relief, but a fragile seed of hope he hadn't dared to plant. And behind them, the reporter's camera captured every second, framing the unlikely scene. The governor of the state standing in a parking lot, speaking gently with an old farmer beside a rusty blue pickup truck. The courthouse parking lot was still buzzing when Governor Langford turned back toward the auction hall, her security team parting the crowd like water around a stone. The investors, developers, and speculators inside the hall shifted nervously as whispers spread. Something unusual, something dangerous to their carefully managed world, was unfolding before their eyes. Governor Langford's heels echoed sharply on the polished floor as she approached the podium. Her chief of staff carried a leather folder, already prepared for confrontation. The auctioneer, who had earlier mocked an old farmer, now struggled to keep his voice steady. "The Miller property has already been sold," he said, clearing his throat. "Correction," the governor replied, her tone firm. "The sale is invalid. This auction violated state transparency laws." She lifted a sheet of paper from her aide. "Your notice failed to mention the requirement for a bank guarantee. Cash is a legal form of payment under statute. Denying Mr. Miller's offer was unlawful." A heavy silence blanketed the room. The investors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. One of them began to protest, but the governor's voice cut across the space like a blade. "Furthermore, my office has identified procedural errors in the tax assessment that triggered this auction. Errors tied to the estate of Mr. Miller's late wife. Errors that should never have occurred." Ray, still standing just inside the doorway, could barely comprehend her words. For days he had braced himself for loss, humiliation, and silence. Now, before an entire room of strangers, the governor herself was dismantling the machinery that had threatened to erase his life's work. The auctioneer shifted his weight, his earlier arrogance dissolving. "Governor, surely we can discuss." "There is nothing to discuss," she interrupted. "The property is no longer available for sale. This proceeding is hereby suspended." Her words fell like a gavel. Ray's weathered face remained unreadable, but inside his heart was a storm of disbelief. He had walked in with nothing but his savings and his dignity. He had walked out in shame. And now, moments later, he stood on the brink of a miracle he hadn't dared to imagine. At the back of the hall, the young reporter's camera continued to roll. First, it had caught an old man being mocked, shoved aside as if he were invisible. Now it captured the same man standing in the light of vindication, the highest official in the state defending his right to fairness. The video spread quickly, first among those present, then across phones and screens far beyond Lacey County. By nightfall, clips of Ray being escorted from the hall, followed by the governor's intervention, had been watched over 100,000 times. By morning, that number would climb into the millions. Headlines erupted across state and national news. "Farmer humiliated, governor intervenes. Ancestral land saved after viral outcry. David versus Goliath, 73-year-old stands up to the system." The auction company, sensing the storm, issued a careful statement. They blamed miscommunication regarding acceptable payment methods, though their condescension had been plain for all to see. The Dallas Investment Group, now under the eye of regulators, withdrew quietly, their silence louder than denial. Ray sat in his farmhouse that evening, the same letter still folded in his pocket. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. His land was not yet safe, but something had shifted. He had walked into the auction to fight alone. By nightfall, millions were fighting with him. And for the first time in many years, hope felt real. 3 days after the auction, Raymond Miller once again found himself walking up the courthouse steps. The same doors through which he had been escorted in shame now opened with courtesy. Inside, the air felt different. Not cold, not indifferent, but almost welcoming. County personnel greeted him by name, offering coffee, guiding him to a conference room where a group of officials waited. The county administrator began formally, her tone respectful. "Mr. Miller, we want to personally apologize for the treatment you received. It was inappropriate and does not reflect the values of this county." Ray nodded slightly, uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the words. Apologies were rare in his life. The administrator continued, sliding a folder across the polished table. "Governor Langford ordered a review of your property's tax status. We've identified errors in how your late wife's estate was processed. Those errors incorrectly triggered the delinquency notice. The tax issue has now been resolved and the auction sale invalidated. The Miller farm is fully returned to your ownership. Ray stared at the papers, the official seals, the signatures that carried weight. He had braced himself for loss, but never for restoration. His calloused fingers trembled slightly as he closed the folder, too overwhelmed to speak. "Mr. Miller," said a woman from the governor's office, stepping forward. "There's something else." She placed another document in front of him. "An individual has come forward, wishing to assist with any remaining obligations related to your property." Ray frowned, shaking his head. "I don't accept charity." The woman's voice softened. "It isn't charity. The donor was very specific about that. This is repayment of a debt." She handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was a short note written in careful handwriting. "Mr. Miller, when I was 10 years old, my family lost everything in the drought of '94. We had no food, no money. You gave us seeds, taught my father how to plant them, even though you were struggling yourself. That garden fed us until he found work again. I never forgot. Today, I am the CEO of a technology company. What you gave me wasn't just food, it was dignity and hope. Please allow me to return it now. Consider this a debt long overdue. A child who once ran through your fields." Ray's eyes lingered on the final line. He remembered the family vaguely, one of many he had helped without thinking. Seeds shared, advice given, no different from countless acts of neighborly kindness. He had never thought of it as remarkable. To him, it was simply what people did when others were in need. "Is this real?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar uncertainty. "Very real," the woman confirmed. The benefactor insisted on anonymity, but was determined to help the moment they learned of your situation. Ray folded the letter carefully, slipping it into his pocket as though it were something fragile. His throat tightened. He had walked into the auction as a man stripped of dignity. Now, piece by piece, dignity was being returned not by officials or systems alone, but by a memory of kindness sown decades earlier. News of the anonymous donor spread quickly, adding another layer to the viral story. The farmer who had been humiliated now became the symbol of something greater. Conservatives praised his self-reliance and heritage. Progressives saw him as proof of resilience against predatory systems. For once, voices from opposite sides found common ground in the story of a man who asked only for fairness. 2 weeks later, Ray stood behind the stage at the State Agricultural Fair, nerves buzzing through his chest. This was no place for a farmer who had spent his life with soil under his nails, not microphones. Governor Langford smiled as she joined him. "Nervous?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Ray admitted, tugging at the cuff of his Sunday shirt. "Just speak from the heart," she said kindly. "That's what brought us here." When Ray stepped onto the stage, polite applause met him. Many in the crowd didn't yet know who he was, but then the giant screens lit up, the viral video playing once more. The frail old man clutching an envelope, humiliated. Then the governor's arrival, her intervention. The applause swelled, genuine now, carrying him forward. Ray reached into his pocket and pulled out the same old envelope that had once held his life savings. Empty now, but heavy with meaning, he held it up for all to see. His voice, though unpolished, carried clear. "I came to that auction with every dollar I had, not asking for handouts, only for fairness. What I received was more than fairness. I received recognition that some things can't be measured in dollars. Not family history, not land that has fed generations, not the dignity of honest work." By the time he finished, many in the audience were wiping their eyes. His words, simple and direct, cut deeper than polished speeches ever could. And though Ray walked off stage still calling himself just a farmer, he had unknowingly become something larger. A voice for those too often silenced. A reminder that kindness echoes, sometimes decades later, in ways one could never predict. The weeks after the fair brought changes to Miller Farm that Ray could hardly believe. Where once he had braced himself to lose everything, now there was renewal. The anonymous donor's trust provided for repairs he had never imagined possible. The barn's leaking roof, patched countless times with tar and hope, was replaced with sturdy beams and new shingles. The irrigation system, once a web of rusted pipes held together by wire, now flowed steady and efficient. Even the farmhouse, with its creaking floors and outdated wiring, received upgrades. Safe, modern, yet still keeping the soul of its century-old frame. At the entrance of the property, a new wooden sign was mounted on the weathered gate. Its carved letters read, Miller Farm, established 1927, restored 2020. Ray stood before it, his hand brushing over the fresh paint, the grooves of the carving. He felt the weight of generations in that wood, the survival of his grandfather through the Dust Bowl, his father's stubbornness during hard years, his own quiet endurance through a lifetime of toil. He had nearly lost it all, but now the land seemed to breathe again, stronger than before. Neighbors who had once passed him with polite nods now stopped at his driveway, bringing casseroles, besides, or just words of respect. School teachers began bringing students to see the farm, teaching them about old methods of planting and harvesting. For the first time in years, the Miller farm was not just a private inheritance, it was a living lesson in history. One Saturday morning, as Ray mended a fence, a minivan pulled into the yard. A family stepped out, a man, a woman, and two children. The youngest, clutching a school notebook, walked hesitantly forward. "Mr. Miller?" the father called. "Sorry to bother you. My son's doing a project on local history. Could he ask you a few questions?" Ray wiped his hands on a rag, smiling faintly. "Of course, happy to help." The boy looked up with wide eyes. "Is it true the governor came here because of you?" Ray knelt slightly, meeting the child's gaze. "Not because of me, son. Because of what I represent." "What's that?" the boy asked, pencil poised. Ray paused, considering. "The idea that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you. That's standing up for what you believe matters, even if you think nobody's listening." The boy scribbled furiously in his notebook, while Ray invited the family to walk with him. He showed them the oak tree his grandfather had planted nearly a century ago, the field where his father tested drought-resistant crops, the small stream where he himself had played as a boy. "History isn't just in books," Ray said gently. "It's in the land beneath your feet." Later that day, when the family had gone, a package arrived in the mail. Inside was a framed copy of the Family Farm Preservation Initiative, signed by Governor Langford. Beneath the seal, a handwritten note read, "Mr. Miller, your courage reminded us all that government should serve people, not just process. Thank you for your letter." Ray mounted the frame on a central wooden post inside his farmhouse, beside a small plaque he had made himself. This isn't just land, it's memory. Months passed, and though media attention slowly faded, as it always does, the effects of Ray's story remained. When a national news program finally convinced him to give an interview, he spoke simply, his gaze drifting across his fields. "I didn't change the world," he said. "I just reminded people that folks like me, who work the land, who keep their word, who carry history, still matter in this modern world." The camera caught him silhouetted by the sunset, the long shadows of the fields stretching toward tomorrow. His farm was safe, his dignity restored, and his story had become more than survival. It had become a lesson. Ray understood now that his victory wasn't only personal. It was proof that justice, though rare, could still prevail. That dignity could still silence arrogance. And that kindness, even decades old, could bloom into something life-changing. As the sun sank below the horizon, the carved sign at the gate glowed in the fading light. Miller Farm, 1927-2023. A reminder that some legacies endure, not because they are easy to keep, but because they are worth everything to preserve. Raymond Miller's story is not just about land. It is about memory, fairness, and the quiet strength of ordinary people. If you believe dignity and kindness still matter in today's world, share this story, follow, and let others know that sometimes justice truly does prevail.